G'day, wrestling mates. Welcome to If You See Kayfabe, a very, very special version. Just this morning, early this morning, Australia time, I finished an interview with a very special subject, the only son of the legendary 8-time NWA World Heavyweight Champion Harley Race. Spoke to Justin Race. It was a lot of fun. It looks like we'll probably do it again in the future because I didn't get to every question I wanted to. His time was limited. He was very gracious with his time, which I profusely thank him for. So please, after the opener, enjoy my conversation with Justin Race. It will be completely unedited, but what I will do in my post production, you'll see that there's a few photos put in for context and a bit of light and shade. But otherwise, it's a great combo we had. It was like two old mates catching up. See you soon. Hello, wrestling mates. Welcome to a very, very special version of If You See Kayfabe with your wrestling mate from down under, SouthernJoe. And as you can see, we've got a twin screen because we've got a very, very special guest. He is the only son of an absolute legendary wrestler, 8-time NWA champion Harley Race. Welcome to If You See Kayfabe, my newest wrestling mate, Justin Race. How you doing?
Thank you, Joe. I'm doing great. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing very well. Thanks for asking. I just,
Good.
I don't know if you know EPL soccer at the moment. I just was doing like a live stream for West Ham United. I've never
Oh,
been to England, but I follow a multitude of sports.
yeah.
I think sports is a great way to one you release your release your ventations or release whatever's pent up inside you. It's an entertainment. And I mean, one
Sure.
thing too, because two things you and I have in common. One, we lost our fathers 5 years ago. You in August, myself in September. But
I'm sorry to hear
also,
that.
yes, no, I had yourself, so thank you. But we both grew up in an era when wrestling was the kayfabe era, when wrestling was considered legitimate.
Yes.
Um, when did you like? There's a terminology that the veterans use of smartening up. So when did you get smartened up to the business?
Well, there was never like a time that I was sat down and said, this is how this works. Excuse me. Um, oh, my dad was world champion for a very long time. I mean, he missed a week or two here and there. If he'd lose it to Dusty Rhodes or to Giant Bubba in Japan or whatever. But he usually got it back. So for the better part of a decade, he was world champion,
Hmm.
which meant traveling constantly. He wrestled 300 days a year, mostly for 1 hour. Um, Traveled another 2, 3 weeks, but the promoters knew what they were putting him through as far as a schedule, and then what he was putting himself through, going an hour every night. And
Mm.
you know what a heel he was. He'd let someone pound on him for 58 minutes, and he'd win in the last two. Um, he always said, "Last two are mine." Um, the promoters, whether it be down in Australia, but was it Ron Miller back then?
Ron Miller, yeah, and Jim Barnett before him.
Well, Jim Barnett was was his promoter, was my dad's booker, so to speak. He was the world champion booker. So whoever was the world champion, that was Jim Barnett.
Yeah.
But our Bubba in Japan or Sam Mushnick here in the Central States or wherever, the promoters realized what they were doing to him and what they were putting him through. So they often flew my mom and I with them.
Hmm.
So I always say, as I grew up, I spent a lot of time with my father, a lot more than people would think,
Hmm.
with that type of schedule. It just wasn't at home. It was in
Yeah.
hotel rooms in foreign cities and whatever. So with
Hmm.
that being said, as I grew up, when I was a young kid, my mom and dad would kind of have like a little code word, and is this match tonight going to be a wrestling match or a bloodbath, like it would Bruiser Brody or Abdul the Butcher or something
Abdullah,
like
yeah,
that.
I
Then
was gonna say.
mom and I went to the movies or we went to Putt Putt or whatever. Uh, but often we go, and they made a mistake, and the match would turn into just a brutal match. And that was very traumatizing for a 6, 7, 8-year-old kid. You don't
Mm,
understand. All you see is your dad getting hit over the head with a metal chair and blood flying everywhere, and you don't really understand.
mm,
So I'd cry and yell and scream. My mom would have to take me out of the arena. So as I grew up and into my like 11, 12, and then into my teenage years, I started realizing that yeah, everyone hated my father, but for some reason they didn't hate him enough not to buy a ticket to come.
mm. They knew
And so as he
they knew
explained,
how
and
good
he
a
explained
wrestler he
it to me
was.
like that. Well, he'd explain. He didn't say anything about really being smartening up. He just said, "Look, I'm a bad guy." Or he even told me what a heel. I'm a heel. The more I make the fans mad at me, the more they come back to watch me because they want to see me get beat. It's my
Yeah,
job. So as he explained that, and I kind of watched, I got a bit older. I never back to what your question was. I never really got smartened up. I just kind of figured it out.
hmm, fair enough.
I
Yeah,
just figured out that, okay, so that's really cool that all the fans are yelling and screaming and yelling names at my father because the auditorium is full, and that's the whole key to the whole thing is, as they say back then, butts and seats. And if
yeah.
there's a butt in every seat in this auditorium, and they're all here to see my dad get pounded on for an hour, well, so be it.
Mm. He must have had incredible cardio to be able to do that night after night.
Oh
Because
Lord.
I mean
Well,
nowadays when a match goes 20 minutes, they're so gassed afterwards.
well, he had a wrestling school, and well, before he started his wrestling school, we'd watch whatever the WWF program was of the day, and I used to wrestle an hour every night. Now it takes me 20 minutes to get to the ring for a 5-minute match.
Yeah,
And so that was, yeah, he didn't like that. In fact, the motto of my dad's wrestling school was shut up and wrestle.
yeah. And then someone else made that into a podcast.
Yes, in fact, I was on that podcast. And
Yeah, so
when he told me the name of the podcast, I was like, that was the motto of my dad's wrestling school? He said, yeah, I actually, I can't remember if he said he made the motto because of my dad's school or it just kind of
he
happened coincidentally. I can't remember what he said, but
he did because I think he was working at WWF at the same time as what your dad
yes,
was.
you're correct. You're right.
Yeah,
You're
because
right.
I did hear that, and I want to go back to something you mentioned on that particular podcast later on. But one thing I'm interested in: how much do you feel there is a crossover between Harley Race, the wrestler, and Harlan Leland Race, the dad, the wife, the man about town?
Well, you have to look real close. I mean, he was a bad guy. He was the toughest, they call him the toughest wrestler ever. And I mean, how can't you be? You go for a decade wrestling 300 nights a week, I mean, 300
Mm,
nights a year, and getting pounded on for 50. He could, they always used to say my dad can make a broomstick look like a good wrestler. So no matter the level of talent that he was wrestling, he made that person look good for 58 minutes.
mm,
So, he, so he was a tough guy and he was brutal, and that's the way he was in the ring. And at home, he was a loving, caring, gentle dad. He'd done anything for my mom and I.
mm-hmm.
And a lot of the wrestlers, interestingly enough, back then, a lot of the wrestlers traveled not as much as him, but traveled a lot. A lot of them did it on purpose. They didn't want to be at home with their families,
Yeah.
unfortunately, or they didn't want to bring them along. Well, mom and I went with my dad every chance we got. And luckily enough, during that near decade period when he was world champion, I was again somewhere 5, 6 years old up to 12, 13, 14 years old. In other words, I was in the elementary school level, so it really didn't matter if I missed class. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they'd go to the teachers and they'd say, we're going to take Justin out of school for a month to go to Japan. And the teachers are like, take him. He'll learn more there than he will here. And my
Yeah.
mom was my tutor, and we'd take all my homework and all assignments with me, and my mom we'd have class every day, so to speak, and I did my homework. But otherwise, learning the cultures and the goings-ons of other countries was more educational than being in school.
Mm.
I think I was in like 10 countries before I was 12 years old, including
Wow.
Australia.
Yes. Because apparently you
Um,
were down here the time that your dad put Ron Miller over clean on
uh,
TV.
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, and that's sort of funny because because I used to watch that show religiously. It was on what we call Channel 9 at midday on Saturday and on Sunday. And for some reason, I
Uh,
tuned in late, so I missed the first bit. I've only recently seen the beginnings of it on YouTube, where he was supposed to wrestle Kevin Martin,
you
and
mean the
then
promo?
yeah, the promo he did, and he was
Yeah.
getting upset. And but the point is, I came in late, and I knew Harley was world champion
Uh,
because they'd shown the promo of him, and when Ron Miller beat him, I thought I was running around the lounge room because I thought Ron Miller became champion. I thought an Australian is champion, and
uh,
it amazes me that your dad didn't wrestle under his own name originally.
well, yeah, when he first started out, he was Mad Dog Race. He wrestled under a name called the Great Mortimer. He even wore a mask for a while. But my father's father, my grandpa, Jay, sat my dad down one time and said, "Why do you want to make a name for someone else?"
Yeah, and especially because
And so I
Harley
told him
Ray,
he wrestled. Harley Race is a great wrestling name, if that's what you want
yeah,
to say.
yeah,
People ask me all the time, "Is that his real name?" I'm like, "Yeah, my name's Justin Race, and he's Harley Race. My mom's Ivana Race."
yeah.
Um, yeah, after that, he wrestled after his dad told him that or asked him that. He wrestled under Harley Race for the rest of his career, whether it was Handsome Harley Race, back when you remember him with like Ron Miller back in the 70s, and then of course the King when he was in the WWF or
Hmm.
WWE. But yeah, it was always the Harley Race part.
Yeah, because he started only that story you tell about your grandfather was after he had his car accident, which nearly finished his career there and then early on.
Yes. Yeah. Well, he ended up hitting a semi truck. I won't explain. It was wintertime and they were in the wrong lanes, but he hit a semi truck head to head, big
Oh,
truck. And he had his first wife and his unborn child in the car with him, who in fact died in the wreck.
yeah.
And he was pronounced dead at the scene. And on the way in the ambulance, on the way to the hospital, they found a pulse.
Oh,
And so, long story short, they were going to amputate his leg. They fixed his arm. Remember that big scar he had with the brace and the six pins in his arm. Well, they were going to amputate his leg. And he had just broke into the business about a year or so before that. And a promoter named Gus Karras, he was a promoter for the central area of the country.
hmm.
He heard what had happened. He went to the hospital. My grandma and grandpa were there. My dad's mom and dad were there. And he said, look, they can amputate his legs just as much in St. Joe, which is a lot bigger town than where he was. He was in a little town called Maryville. They can amputate his leg anywhere. Let's at least get a specialist to look at it. So, uh, again, long story short, they took him to St. Joe. They figured out a way to save his leg, and all due to Gus Karras, this wonderful older man that I knew when I was a little boy.
Mm.
Um, because of him, he saved my dad's leg and thus saved his career, and well, the rest is history.
And your dad ended up having points in the Central States promotion, didn't he?
Correct.
Like a
Yeah, the
percentage.
third of it.
Yeah, yeah. Because that's where a lot of his earlier career was before he became NWA champion,
Yes.
winning
Well,
some
he
of the
was,
regional
yeah.
titles.
There was two cities on Earth that my dad was actually popular in. It was Kansas City, where I live now, where we lived when I was a kid, and then there is St. Louis, which is on the other side of the state, which is St. Louis for a long time was like one of the wrestling capitals of the world. Wrestling
Mm,
at the Chase. I don't know if you all got that down there, but um, that's kind of where wrestling went to TV was in St. Louis. It was a play. It was a show called Wrestling at the Chase. The Chase being a hotel.
mm,
And then the ballroom they'd set up a ring. And so yeah, he was popular in St. Louis and he was popular in Kansas City, but everywhere else they hated him.
mm. But I don't know if it was would you have said it was a more a hate but respect because he was that good in the ring? Because I feel like people didn't boo him like they wanted to cut him with a knife or anything like that, although he might have got some people swinging at him or want to
Oh
take
yeah,
the best shot at him. Because I did
yeah.
see that post you had of the of your dad putting the guy on the hood of the car.
And bought him a beer.
Yeah, and then bought him a beer anyway. Yeah, but I've always just had that feeling that he's one of those ones. Okay, he was hated, but he wasn't hated because he backed up. He could back up what he said, even
Yeah.
not just so much kayfabe, but as a shoot.
I always say, and he said, I guess I probably got this from him, but people loved to hate him.
Hmm.
They he'd make them so mad because he'd let Ric Flair or Miller or back in the day, one of the Dory or Terry Funk or Briscoes, or even in the newer day, Hogan, whatever. Um, he'd let them come that close to winning, and
Hmm.
then he'd win at the end, he'd put him over at or he'd go over at the very last minute, and boy, that made people mad because they thought he was beat. And so,
Hmm.
doggone it, the next time he was in town, they were going to see him because this time maybe he'll get beat. And
Hmm.
everyone wants to see the champion beat. I mean, and that's not just, I mean, that's in most sports, but even when I wrestled, I started wrestling when I was 7 and collegiate wrestling, little kids wrestling.
Yeah.
And I wrestled all the way through high school. Well, when I was a young kid, I don't know if they have similar, but probably down there, but like a big high school, and then there'll be wrestling mats all over the floor of the high school, and there'll be like 8 little matches going on at one time. Because, you're talking 8 to 14 years old kids, or 6. Actually, there was a 6 in there, so 6 to 14-year-old kids.
Hmm.
And the mats were divided up into quarters, so there's like 8 matches going on. Every time I went to wrestle, the entire gymnasium focused on my match, screamed and yelled at me like curse words and bad names and whatever, and chanted for the other guy who they didn't even know. They just wanted to see Harley's son get beat.
Oh, crikey.
And I'd look at my dad and I'm like, Dad, why are they yelling at me? And he's like, don't worry about it. Just go out and kick his ass.
Uh,
I'm like, all right.
so,
But so wrestling is a very emotional sport, and people
mm,
really get drawn into it. I mean, you don't see people throwing rocks and whatnot at their hated opponent in a football match or
mm,
a baseball game here in Kansas, in America, or American football or ice hockey or whatever. You
yeah,
don't see fans throwing stuff at each other or at their opponent. They just don't like them.
yeah.
Wrestling is a
Well,
very emotional sport, and we literally, when we would leave some towns, here I am, 6, 7, 8 years old, little boy, and my mother and my dad. And the police would have to get us to our car with the riot shields all over the top of our heads, and you could hear the
mm,
rocks and the parking lot debris and knives and whatever they were throwing at us hitting off the thing. And at the time, I thought it was kind of cool, it was like Secret Service or whatever. Here I'm sneaking through, and they get us to our car, and off we'd go, no speed limit, just off we'd go to get out of there. And then I got a little older and I'm like, these people are throwing rocks at a 7-year-old and his mother because
mm,
they don't like his dad? Really?
yeah, yeah.
That's,
Bit
you don't see
crazy.
that in any other sport.
They've seen it a little bit in European football, European soccer. But
Yeah.
did that have an influence on you not going into pro wrestling?
Well, that was never really an option for me because of the schedule, the brutal schedule. I mean, Dad was the first really and only true traveling champion. He went
Mm-hmm.
from territory to territory. He might spend, a week or two or even a month, like in Japan or Australia, in a territory, but then he went on to the next territory. Whereas most of the guys traveled by car within their territory, and that's where they wrestled. Occasionally, they'd go outside, maybe to the next territory joining them.
Yeah.
So, with that, and then the brutality that happened to him, that he allowed to happen to him, like as I said, getting beat for 58 minutes, beat up. I mean, seriously, I mean, he's the ring general in there, and he's telling them to, slap him and hit him over the head with a chair and body slam, and whatever. So my parents decided that I was not going to go into that business. So
Mm.
even though I wrestled and I was state and national champion many times in the kids wrestling,
Mm-hmm.
once I got through high school, my sport was football, American football,
Mm-hmm.
and I chose to do that in college. But yeah, wrestling was never really an option for me. They didn't. My dad said it's too hard on the body, it's too hard on the family.
Mm.
It didn't, he never said it wasn't worth it because he loved it, but he
Yeah.
could see, as times moved on, how much more difficult that would be on a family and whatever, and uh, that wrestling isn't the same as it used to be, and so they kind of kept me away from that. They did keep me away from that.
Because well, if today's schedules, which are a lot lighter, if that was what became when you were younger, would that have changed your decision?
I think so. Maybe. I don't know. That's kind of hard to speculate. I remember a conversation my father and I had once. I went to SMU, Southern Methodist University. It's in Dallas, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And it was graduation time for me. I graduated from college. And which in America, graduation, when you graduate from college, it's like a graduation week. They have a bunch of different functions and whatever until you actually do graduate. And so dad was there, mom was there. They were separated at the time, but they were staying in the same hotel. And dad and I were standing on the balcony of the hotel looking out over the city of Dallas. And he looked over at me, he goes, son, I'm finally at peace. And I said, what do you mean? He said, all of your life, I've had a little part of me that wanted to break you into the business. But I went ahead and kept that to myself and followed your mom and I's plan of you going to college, graduating from college, getting into business and doing something a little less hard on your body and a little less hard on your family. And he said, now that you're graduating, and he couldn't, he told me how proud he was of me and whatever. He said, I'm at peace that we made the right decision, keep you out of that business. And yeah, I'll never forget that conversation. That was just kind of I didn't know that he had thought that the whole time. I kind of figured, I saw some of the other guys having their kid, Dusty's kids and Flair. Well, she was much later, but some of the kids of his friends got into the business. Larry Henning's son, Kurt.
Mm.
Um, so,
Well, then Kurt's son as
but that
well,
night,
being said.
that yeah, Kurt was yeah, he was a great
Mm.
guy. But that evening, he just told me he was at peace with the decision that they had made.
Mm. And did you know Larry and Kurt well? Obviously, because your dad
Oh yeah.
tagged with
Uh,
Larry.
there's some photos I've posted on various places of my dad and Larry and Larry's family and well my my dad's family is my mom and I. Sitting on a beach in Tampa. We lived near each other in Tampa, Florida, when 1973, 74, something like that. So yeah, we always had, there's some pictures of, I can't remember if it was Kurt or his younger brother, but whatever, like on the beach making sandcastles, just being kids.
Mm.
Dad and Larry would go spear fishing off we lived, right off the beach. They just walk in and with their tanks. And back then there wasn't really any regulation. There was a regulation on how many fish you could spear though.
All right.
And of course, Dad and Larry paid no attention to that. They got as many fish as they could get. And then when they'd start coming in, you'd see them like stand up, as they're coming up the beach because they just literally walked off the beach to dive, to scuba dive. And you could see him walk out to the beach, and me and I guess it was Kurt and his younger brother, what was his name? I don't know. We went running down and we grabbed some of the fish. They'd have the fish like on the line
Yeah.
through the gill, and and we'd grab some of the fish. So when the game wardens came up, it looked like there were
You guys have
three,
caught some
four,
of them.
five of us had all those fish. And they looked at my dad and Larry, and they're the ones with the tanks on, the scuba diving tanks on. And then they look at these little 3 and 4 year old, 5 year old little boys, a bunch of fish in their hand and no scuba tanks on. Plus there was a age, that you could spearfish at, and it wasn't 5 or 6 years old.
Yeah,
And they just look at my dad and just and they'd go on. I mean, they'd recognize Dad and Larry, and they'd just be like, whatever, and they'd just go on down
yeah.
the beach. It was on
Probably not
horseback
want to
a lot,
chance
or
their
they were
arm.
on like some, yeah, or they were little dune buggies, and they just look and smile and shake their heads and whatever, Larry, whatever, Harley, catch as many fish as you want.
Yeah. I saw one photograph you posted on Facebook, which was an interesting one. Was yourself and Antonio Inoki. I think it was Terry Funk. I'm not sure. I'm not sure who the third person was. But it got to me thinking that there was the wrestler versus boxer match and Inoki up against Muhammad Ali. How do you
Uh-huh.
think that match would have went if it was your dad against Ali instead?
Well, Dad doesn't lose.
Hmm.
It doesn't matter who it's against. Boxer, wrestlers, guy in a bar, whatever, he doesn't lose. And I mean, unless, it's contractual that he has to for,
Yeah.
to give up the title to someone or whatever. So I think that, I don't know. Dad was such a good, just all out brawler, street fighter, which boxing, has more in tune with that type of a person than does really a wrestler. I mean, boxers don't grab each other and hold each other, they punch.
Yeah.
Street fighters. And so Dad was such a good street fighter that, he could make it with the best of them in a boxing match. In fact, there's new figure. I've got some over there. There's a new toy line that's come out and has my dad and superstar Billy Graham on one, like two figures, like looking at each other. And the other side of the packaging is Muhammad Ali and Gorilla Monsoon.
Have you got a picture of a thing of it, or is it too
Yeah.
far away?
Or can you?
Yeah. Oh, I could. So Justin's just gone off to get the figures.
There's my dad and superstar Billy Graham. I don't know
Yeah.
if you can see that in the light.
Yeah, and your dad's there in that robe that I actually asked you about on Facebook because he seemed to
Uh-huh.
like that red, white, and blue robe, and you said it was the
Yeah,
colours
well,
of the.
it's the colors of America. So,
Yeah.
and then on the back, that's Muhammad Ali and Gorilla Monsoon.
Oh, and Gorilla Monsoon was still wrestling.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Well, Gorilla Monsoon was the first guy to wrestle Ali, and then Inoki.
Oh, okay. See, back in the day, we
So it
because
comes
more
with
so
it's a 4 pack.
four pack.
They did a great job on the detail and the belts and stuff and whatever.
I reckon so. Yeah, and also too, it's so lifelike. Um, I can see Harley's
Big,
features are very distinct.
yeah, big
Yeah.
lamb chops on his face.
Yeah, yeah. No, but what I was mainly getting at, because what I read about the lead up to the Inoki Ali bout was that there was discussions about whether it was going to be a shoot or a work and who was going to do
Inoki
the
or
job.
Muhammad Ali?
Well, between the two of them, between the two camps,
You
there
mean
was
between
there was
Inoki and Muhammad Ali?
yeah, yeah, there
Oh,
was
oh,
that's
oh, oh,
that's what I'm getting at. That between Inoki and Ali, there was a back and forth discussions about whether it be a shoot, whether it be a work, and protecting Ali's reputation and Inoki's reputation and that. So that's why I
yeah.
wondered whether your dad would have, whether Harley would have just said that we're making a straight up shoot, best man win.
I remember at the time, or not at the time, but I was a little bit too young, but a little later, I asked Dad about that, and he said, uh, there's absolutely no reason for a boxer to beat a wrestler.
Hmm.
All you got to do, let him swing a few times. You might have to take a few to the face, but once you get in on him, it's over.
Hmm.
So why the hell would I ever want to do that? So I think that if they ask him, he probably turned it down. because regardless of how they wanted the outcome to be, whether they wanted to protect Ali's reputation or whatever, uh, Dad just believed in things should be real and
Mm,
common, and like he said, and it should be common sense. I mean, as long as you don't get knocked out by the first two punches the boxer throws and just go straight into him, and whether it's get him into the rope or get him into the turnbuckle or whatever, but get in where he can't swing, then there should be no match after that. It should be all over.
mm,
You should never let go of him, never let him have the opportunity to swing at you, which is all he can do. That's his job, is to swing punches. And once you
mm,
take that talent or that characteristic of a boxer away, the swinging of his fist, once you take that away from him, there isn't anything else left. Whereas a wrestler can throw punches, but also can grapple and wrestle on the floor and get outside the ring and hit each other with chairs and stuff and whatever. Imagine trying to hold a chair with boxing gloves. They don't do that kind of stuff.
mm. Well, I mean
So
that's I
there was so
suppose
much
that's
more to wrestling than boxing that Dad was just like, that would be stupid for me to go in there and wrestle a boxer and lose.
yeah, and I suppose because that's way before UFC or anything like that.
Oh, well,
Um,
yeah. Even still, though, with US, people ask me about MMA and UFC. Brock was Lesnar. He's an MMA guy. He was a world champion in the WWE. People ask me about that a lot, and I always tell them, and my dad told me, well, I'd ask him about wrestling, especially in Japan. He wrestled some guys that were whatever degree black belts and kick and swing and punch and break cinder blocks with their chops and whatnot. I said, did that ever bother you, wrestling people like that? Are you scared? And he'd tell me, he'd say, son, the day I let some guy jump up in the air, turn around 360 degrees, and kick me inside of my head is the day I quit.
so he probably wouldn't have liked some of the stuff that goes on today.
Yeah, well, I mean, you got nothing against MMA fighter. They're, some bad dudes. But again, as a wrestler, an expert wrestler, if you could take a punch to the head or whatever, he would never allow him to get himself to get kicked in the head. So, my God, if I can't move by that time, watch the
Yeah.
guy, like he said, fly up and kick him. It's like, you think I'm just going to stand there and let him kick me?
Mm,
Um, so once you move in on them and get them down, and even though MMA are wrestlers too, they're grapplers, they've got gloves on and stuff that impedes what they can do. Well, Dad had that grip that he could
mm,
just break bones with. So without the glove on, he could break people's bones, get them on the ground, and break people's arms and hands and whatever with that grip of his. So
yeah.
again, there was no reason he thought that there was no reason for him to lose against someone that's only real um, weapons were their hands and their feet.
Yeah. Well, I'd imagine I was just picturing a handshake between him and Danny Hodge would be seismic.
There's a picture of him. I think I might have posted. There's a picture of both of them. Both one's pointing at one. Dad's pointing at Danny, and Danny's pointing at Dad. And people always ask me, did they ever, go at it? They're the only two human beings I've ever seen that could take a stainless steel pair of pliers and bend the handles together.
Yeah.
And of course, there's the story of them breaking apples and things like that. And people ask me all the time, did they ever play Mercy? And I said, no. Well, Dad always told me, he said, why would I do that? We're just going to hurt each other.
Yeah.
They're both so doggone strong that neither one would win, but neither one would lose either. They just end up with a bunch of broken bones in their hands.
Yeah.
And
And when they're when
so
they're
what's
when
the point? In other words,
missing out on some payoffs as well because everything's based in those days was based on the house and you had to
yeah,
be there to
yeah,
wrestle. And I
yeah.
mean, your dad came from a long line of folk who protected the business and made it. Yeah, and obviously he was one of the most legit guys who made things look legit. How did he feel about the eroding of kayfabe?
Oh, he didn't like it. Again, he had a wrestling school, and so he had to get used to actually hearing the guys talk to each other, as opposed to back in his day when they not only would they speak Carney, which was a carnival language that no one could
Yep.
understand anyway, just
Mm.
sounded like gibberish. But they tried to cover, well, they did cover that stuff up. I mean, he told if he leaned in on Andre, uh, he, you know, slam, suplex, kick out 2.5, and all that, and just a second or two while they were pushed up against each other in the corner.
Mm,
But nowadays, you can like hear the guy. You can be in the third row and hear the guys talking to each other. It's like, oh, come on,
mm,
you
mm.
need to do a little bit better than that. So he wasn't happy about it, but you got to kind of go on with the times. What happens happens. And again, you
Yeah,
go back to that 20 minutes to get to the ring for a 5-minute match, and he'd say, I teach them how to be wrestlers. They go up to New York, learn how to be movie stars.
yeah. Because like I remember
So,
seeing the Eddie Mansfield expose,
mm,
and then that led to John Stossel. I mean, the biggest thing I could imagine is you see Dr. D. David Schultz hitting John Stossel when Stossel said, "Oh, I believe this is fake." Imagine if he said that to your dad. He wouldn't have walked
well,
out of the
Dad
building on
used
his
to
own.
when Dad used to get asked that question. I wish I had a nickel for every time I was asked that question. I think I'd own my own island right now. Um, when Dad would ask that, or he'd be, well, like the picture you just saw here posted recently with him on the guy on the car.
Hmm.
That's another nitwit coming up and saying it's fake and whatever. Dad, back in the day, now Dad was 60 some years old when he put that guy on the roof of that car, or on the hood of that car.
Hmm.
But back in the day, Dad would be like, he'd just look, he'd say, "There's the ring. Join me." And
Hmm.
no one ever did, of course. They're scared to death. But
Yeah.
they oh, it's all fake, it's all predetermined, and he'd just say, "There's the ring. Join me."
Yeah. Well, he could do it because he could back it up. Did he ever
Yeah.
work for
Well,
Cowboy
that's
Bill
another reason
Watts?
he was world back to that near decade run. That's another reason the promoters kept him as champion for so long. And again, allowed my mom and dad to travel with him because they kept him for champion for so long, was if there ever was a shooter, if there ever was someone that was going to go completely against the grain and see
Double
if they could
cross.
actually beat him, they knew that dad could hold his own and win.
Yes,
They
I've
didn't have
read
to
about
worry about
that.
him accidentally losing the title
Hmm. Yeah, they
because there
they
wasn't anybody that was going to beat him.
yeah. I've read about that how they would protect you, be able to use him against any double cross if some of them was going to try and get sideways.
Oh,
Yeah.
and many tried, especially Brody. Frank, well, he didn't really try to win. Frank just tried to hurt people. And
Yeah.
Dad had a way of calming things down, whether it was Frank or whatever. He'd put him in a headlock or arm bar or something. He'd put his head down next to there. "Don't piss me off."
Hmm.
And that's pretty much straightened everything out right there. They didn't want to piss him off because they knew that if push comes to shove, he could legitimately beat the hell out of them.
It was a shame what happened to Bruiser Brody. That
Yeah, yeah,
that
that
was
was.
a
He was
real.
such a nice man. When we were in Japan on a tour, I'm writing my mom's writing a book called Life with the King, and it's like a memoir, kind of a historical, marriage with my dad. I'm reading a book called Don't Tell Your Mother,
Yes, I was going to get to that because I heard about that with the
and
Brian
it's
Sullivan.
exactly. Oh, okay. Well, it's exactly it's about exactly what you think. Story. Dad and I did things, and don't tell your mother.
Yeah.
Because that happened often. Um, but forget where I was when we started that.
With Frank, with Frank Goodish.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. So this wasn't a "don't tell your mother," but this, just funny things that happened between my dad and him. Dad was a very quiet man, but when he spoke, it was either funny, I mean hilarious, or full of wisdom.
Hmm.
So every time, you could tell he'd do one of these and he'd look a little bit, you knew he was about to say something. So the whole room or the dressing room or restaurant or whatever would quiet down because Harley was about to speak.
Hmm.
And so he had a very dry but very just hilarious type. He was just a hilarious guy because the guy who never talks says one thing on a 3-hour flight that's hilarious that has the whole first class cabin laughing, and he just sits there, he just chuckle. So anyway, we're in Japan, and it was a tag team tournament. Dad was with Henning, Brody was with Stan Hansen. Um, there was several other teams there. Um, but Frank used to wear his sweatpants. You know what sweatpants are? Just jogging pants. And he'd
Yeah.
always pull the thing off his ankle. He pulled up to his knee. Well, I thought that was pretty cool. So I started wearing my sweatpants and pulling up to my knee. And we walked out of a hotel or whatever, the group, and Brody and I happened to be near each other. And I was probably 7 or 8 years old. He looks at me, he looks at Frank, he said, God damn it, Frank, look how you got my son dressing. You both look like hobos. And then Frank and I looked at each other and he just kind of winked at me like we got him, you know.
Yeah. And Brody's,
So
I saw Brody's wife is Australian,
yes, yes,
Barbara.
Barbara. Oh yeah, she's a
Yeah.
wonderful friend. See
Mhm.
her quite often. She's a wonderful friend, wonderful woman. She's kept uh Brody's name alive in the business. Of course, her name is Goodish, Barbara Goodish.
Mm.
But yeah, she goes. We see her at a lot of events. I see her at a lot of events. My mom often travels with me to events too. Sign autographs and photos and whatnot. She's a wonderful lady, though. She's about the sweetest thing you can imagine. You're like that crazy. You think of that crazy Frank Brody.
Well,
You
I've
related to
seen,
him,
yeah, no, I've seen that with the
but he wasn't
opposites
like
attract.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, but he wasn't like that. I mean, he was crazy for photos. He was crazy in the ring. But otherwise, he was well, like with me, pull your sweatpants up, piss your dad off, that type of thing. But he was a jokester, just like the rest of them. They were all nice guys.
Mm.
I had the opportunity of them all being very nice to me because of my father and who he was and the boss and all that. And he was either Mr. Race or the boss, or later King, not the King. They just called him King.
Yeah.
Vader would say, King, come over here and help me with this. Or, well, actually, he wouldn't say that. He'd say, King, I'm coming over there. Can you help me with this? Um,
Would that be after
so,
his WWF run?
yes, yeah, they
Mm.
just called him King. I mean, Vince inadvertently kind of gave my dad an honor. At first, the King thing was supposed to be like a gimmick, and it turned out that he kind of became the king of wrestling.
Mm.
I don't know if you like in golfing. Um, there's Tiger Woods, there's Jack Nicklaus, there's all these great golfers that won all these titles, but Arnold Palmer is the king of golf.
Mm.
And we have NASCAR racing here in America. Um, uh, Richard Petty is the king of auto racing. There's
Yeah.
been a lot people that have won more titles and done more of this, more of that, but he's the original. He's the king. Mike Federer, the king of swimming. What's his
Mm.
name? The king of ten. There's one person that they kind of designate as the king of this sport, like Pele, I guess, maybe with even soccer.
Osaka, yeah, yeah.
There's probably been better guys or whatever, but Pele is the king. So when Vince made my dad the king of wrestling, at first, like I said, it was a gimmick. It was supposed to be just king, whatever. But the reason that happened was Dad had won 8 world titles, numerous other titles all around the world. He didn't need another belt to prove anything. He'd proved everything he needed to prove. So they made him the king. And
Mm.
again, Vince kind of had made it as a gimmick, but it ended up sticking to where today he's referred to as the king.
Mm.
There was kings after him. I mean, Haku was a king. Randy Savage, I believe, was the king of the ring. But they don't call them the king now. When they called him the king while they were the king while they held the crown.
Yeah,
Um, but after they lost it, then the next guy became the king. Well, my dad is just still the king.
yeah.
He hasn't been that. He hasn't wrestled as the king since uh 19 in the 1980s. So 40 years later, 35, 40 years later, he's the king.
Mm.
So
I
it was ended up being quite an honor.
Yeah, I read that it was because like I know when I started watching the American wrestling, or we got WWF TV here from WrestleMania
Hmm.
one onwards. We never got anything else. I think we saw the odd NWA match, a single match that might be in isolation on one of the sports programs, and then I discovered the wrestling magazines, especially the Apter ones, and
Yeah.
they the way they explained it was because like Vince never acknowledged another company or a wrestler from another company. So while Harley Race was in the NWA, he wouldn't say, "Oh, by the way, if you change the channel," because it's against his business. It wasn't until he had
Yeah.
them, but he couldn't refer to him as a former eight-time NWA champion because their audience would say, "Well, what the hell's
Well,
an
but he
NWA?"
didn't. That's correct. But he didn't have to because A, the fans knew, and more importantly, back in the dressing room, the mystique of him with the other wrestlers as don't mess with that guy, he's the real deal,
Hmm.
overrode Vince's quest for control over everything. I mean, he had his Hulkamania and Hulk Hogan, whatever. We went to, here's an example. Flew into the Meadowlands, in northeastern United States, in New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
Meadowlands is where one of the American football teams used to play, big, huge stadium. Well, my dad's wrestling bag didn't make it on the flight, or they couldn't find it, or whatever. So we went there, and this is right during Hulkamania. Hulkamania, Hogan, whatever Hogan said goes, and then when Hogan talks, whatever. And Dad's telling some of the guys, he's like, "Man, I don't have a wrestling bag. I don't know where I'm wrestling." And Hogan turned around, and above the entire backstage dressing room and everything, his voice boomed out, "Everyone who isn't a wrestler, go to the airport and find the boss's luggage."
Mm.
And they all left except for the red people that were wrestling, and they went and they found my dad's wrestling bag. But that was even though that Hogan was like the top of the game, Hulkamania, whatever with
Yeah.
Vince, back in the back, Dad was still the boss.
Mm. Well, that's good. That's good. That's a rightful respect.
Sure, it was all respect.
Yeah, because go back to the
I got
Brian
about a
Sullivan
couple more
interview.
minutes, and then
Oh,
a
okay.
couple more minutes, and then I got it. Yeah,
Oh, okay, yeah, because you said you had another
we
thing.
can do it again sometime. I just do have another
Yeah,
commitment.
no, I reckon so because I've got a few. Um, oh, the Don't Tell Your Mother book, has that been released yet? Or are you still finalizing it?
My book, my
Yeah,
mom's book.
yeah.
Oh, no, no, no. Still finalizing. We wanted them out by this fall, which of course it's fall now. Or it is here. Up here it's fall. Um, I remember when we were in Melbourne. It's kind of a funny story. The first time I was there, I was very young, but would have been July or August, and it's 90 some degrees, and Dad's sweating, and we're pouring. People are wearing sweaters. And why in the name of God do you have a sweater on? Well, it's winter. That's winter, mate. And I'm like, I don't care if it's winter or not, it's still 90 some degrees. So anyway, back to your book question. So yes, we wanted to have them out around this fall, but it's writing a book is a very daunting task, a lot bigger of a task than I thought. It's not just putting words on a piece of paper.
Mm,
It's you can do that, but there's a lot of work to be done after that. Whether it's publicity, whether it's what order, like in my mom's book, is a bit chronological. It kind of goes back and forth. Whereas my book is a couple hundred, well, not a couple hundred, but I'll probably have to write two books because I have way more stories than I have room in a book to write of, the don't tell your mother things. Ric Flair and my dad and I, dad at the time had an old Jeep Wagoneer, they called him. And this is in the 70s. And Flair liked it, so Dad sold Flair his, and Dad bought a new one. This is
mm.
a quick "don't tell your mother" story. So we left, and Rick was in front of us, and he pulls up to a stoplight. Well, Dad pulls up behind him. He looks over me. "I wonder how powerful this thing is." And he touches bumpers with Rick and pushes him through the stoplight. And
No.
squealing tires and smoke and whatnot everywhere. Well, a police officer saw this. So
Oh,
he
no.
comes roaring up behind him, stops him. And Rick gets out, Dad gets out, police officer gets out. He looks and sees who he just stopped, and his jaw just, fell to the pavement. And he got on his radio to radio for backup. But he didn't want backup to come to arrest anybody. He wanted all his buddies to come and get autographs.
Autographs.
So now we've got 15, 20 cop cars all around. It looks like a major highway incident or something. There's police cars with their lights on all over the place, and they're out there signing autographs. So they got finished and we're about to go. Dad comes in, sits down in the car, looks over at me. "Don't tell your mother."
Oh, no.
I never did. And to this
Nah.
day, I'll do podcasts and I'll tell a story. And afterward, I'll talk to my mom. She goes, "You guys did what?" I'm 53 years old. She still doesn't know. So, it's an entertaining book. But again, when you're telling stories like that, just story after story, you want it chronologically. Do you want this story here? So it's a lot of, once the writing is done or almost done, there's a lot of putting it together. Just a lot more to it than just writing a book.
So you have like
So
an
we're going to get it
editor.
out as soon as, oh yeah, publishing and distributor and all that kind of thing
Hmm.
too. So, there's a lot more wheels, cogs in the wheel, I should say, than just the one turning around in circles. There's a lot of
Mm.
other gears and a lot of other, facets to it. So, but I'll let you know.
Okay.
Definitely either when we have a release date or when I have a better idea about when they might be coming out, whatever, I will definitely let you know. But look
Oh yeah.
forward to them because they're going to be good
Yeah.
books.
Yeah. Because I'll put it over. No problems. I
That'd
did
be
the
great.
same. I did the same with Ken the Dazzler Dunlop, who's an Australian wrestler. He's
Uh-huh.
actually the Australia's first openly gay wrestler. He retired.
Oh,
If
wow.
he retired probably about 20 years ago, and I've interviewed him twice, and each time I said, make sure you got your book there. So yes,
Yeah.
show it. Oh, because it's good. Sure.
Bit of publicity has to be shameless, even though it might seem embarrassing sometimes. It's got to be shameless.
Look, you got to do it. You got to do it. And just to finish
Yeah.
off, I've got to say the
Yes, sir.
the portrait of your dad behind you there.
Oh, back here, yeah.
Yeah, that's
That was
very
painted
nice.
by a fan. Yeah, that was painted by a fan. I don't know whom, but I actually have two of them. They're posters. It's not framed or anything.
Hmm.
I might have it framed. It's on thick. It's a very nice poster, very high quality poster, but it is a poster.
Mm,
But yeah, I have that there. Dad kind of watching over me, making sure
that's
I'm not
nice.
screwing anything up.
Yeah, that's nice. That's a nice way to finish up.
Yeah. Well, thank
Look,
you. I
Justin.
appreciate that.
Look, Justin, it's been great having you. This has been an absolute
It's
honor
been
and a
an
thrill
honor,
for
Joe.
me. Yeah,
It's been an
thank
honor.
you
It's
very
been an
much.
honor to talk to everyone down under too. I haven't been
Yeah.
there in a while, but I love y'all.
Oh, look,
Nicest
when you
people I
come
know.
here, when you come over, we'll have to go out for dinner.
Sure, that'd be great. Joe, yeah, give me a call. We'll do this again sometime. I really enjoyed myself.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it too. Good luck with everything. Glad that you're
All right.
fighting fit again, and we'll catch up another
Yes.
time.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. Thank you, everyone.
So that was my interview there with Justin Race, the son of Harley Race, the legendary wrestler. I hope you all enjoyed it. Any wrestler or promoter or anyone in the professional wrestling space anywhere in the world has got something they want put over, I'm your man to do it. Please let me know, and I'll be happy to have an interview because I really enjoy doing the interviews. I enjoy doing my pieces to the camera as it is, but the interviews are next level for me. So until next time, this is your wrestling mate from down under. On If You See Kayfabe, I'm Southern Joe. Hooroo.